Hello, and thank you for tuning in tonight to the Lessons of Vietnam show. Here we try to tell the real stories of the men and women who fought in Vietnam and the war itself. If you happen to hear something that you don't think is right, call in and tell us. We'll try to figure out which one's right and so forth, because we want to make sure we get the real story out there. I am Bill Dixon, your host, Vietnam veteran, 1967, 1968, Tet survivor. We are broadcasting from the Raleigh studios of Nissan Communications, and they do several shows during the week, and you might want to tune into some other shows, but I'm glad that you tune in for this show. You're welcome and encouraged, as I mentioned a while ago, to participate in a live show. Call in with your comments. If you see the screen there, it says the telephone number is 919-518-9773, or come in on Skype, which is the address for that is Computers 2K Voice, and be part of the show, ask questions, make comments, or whatever you'd like to do. Like I said, if you hear something that you don't think is true, please let me know, because I'll do some research on it and get back with you and so forth. This is an important part of our show. We have too many veterans who are giving up and getting in crisis and so forth. So you see the number there, 1-800-273-8255, press 1. So if you know a veteran that's in need of a good voice or good person to listen to, good ear, call the number or have them to call the number. Thank you. Okay. We have a special show for you tonight. It's BAT-21. For those, we're not talking about bats who fly around. That was the call sign of Lieutenant Colonel Akil Hamilton. Now, you see the pictures there. We see a plane that was shot down and burned in its landing. We see a helicopter. We see the jungle and the river, and we see a golf course. All of that is involved in tonight's show. I'm gonna have to go through fast. I got a lot to cover tonight, so bear with me. There's a lot of airplanes, helicopters, and I'm trying to keep them all straight, so I hope I don't get too confusing. This is the movie. It was a great movie. Gene Hackman and Danny Glover, BAT-21. What I understand that when this movie was made, this story was classified, which may be why they completely changed it around. It was based on a real story. In other words, there was a man shot down who was happened to be Gene Hackman, who played Gene Akil Hamilton, so forth. But the real story is not to confuse with the movie story. Tonight we're going to talk about the real story. Okay. Now, this was all come about, and there was a lot of things going on then. On March 30th, 1972, the North Vietnamese Army, the NVA, had amassed 3 divisions of artillery, tank, and infantry units along the South Vietnamese border, right at the DMZ. Now, what they were going to do is they were going to start the largest offensive of any offensive during the war, even bigger than Tet. This was called the Easter Offensive or Easter Tide Offensive, and then there's another name for that also. Okay, you see them coming in. Now, let's get Colonel Hamilton involved. The EB-66C, which you see there, reconnaissance aircraft, was used as escorts to the larger, less maneuverable B-52s because they could locate the enemy's surface-to-air missiles, we call them SAMs, their sights, and join the SAM radars if necessary. Because of all that buildup and so forth, on April 2nd, 1972, there had been a short notice request for 2 EB-66s to escort 3 B-52s that would take out a buildup of SAM missiles that had been noted in the southern panhandle of North Vietnam. Okay. This is Lieutenant Colonel Akil Gene Hamilton, and he had a top secret access to Strategic Air Command operations and was an expert in surface-to-air missiles. So he knew a whole lot of stuff, and he probably should have stayed on the ground. The North Vietnamese Army may have possessed information about his presence in Vietnam, and his capture would have meant a lot into the Soviet Union and all the information he had and so forth, because the units were understaffed, 53-year-old, Hamilton, normally the scheduler for the cruise, in other words, he did normally stay on the ground, decided to put himself in the navigator's seat of the EB-66 call sign BAT-21 Bravo. Name of the show, BAT-21. Now, the mission briefing was hastily put together without any warnings of any NVA, that's North Vietnamese Army, SAM's missile sites in South Vietnam. Even though it was clouded, a decision was made to proceed with the mission. As the B-52s with the EB-66's escort approached the border of South and North Vietnam, they immediately came under attack from unseen SAM missile sites. In other words, some of those SAM missiles had been moved into South Vietnam, and nobody knew about it at the time. The others went untouched. The other the B-52s and the other the other electronic airplane went untouched, but BAT-21 was not all that lucky. It was ripped apart by an enemy SA-2 guideline SAM. And you can see the picture there as the navigator, Hamilton, was automatically set to first to eject in the event of emergency. The second was the pilot, Wayne Brady. And the upper hatch, you can see the back arrow was the area that Hamilton would come out of, and of course the pilot there. Brady and the 4 electronic warfare specialists in the rear of the aircraft never made it out. So we got Hamilton now, who is ejected from the plane. But before we go there, I want to tell you about this young man. For 30 plus years, North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Incorporated has met at the Capitol the first Saturday of the month at 12 o'clock noon and called this young man's name, Captain Robin Frederick Gatwood Jr., United States Air Force, Hickory, North Carolina. And as you can see there, 2nd of April, BAT-21, EB-66 tail number, all that. Lieutenant Colonel Ikil Hamilton rescued. Lieutenant Colonel Anthony R. Giannaggi, Gilly, killed in action. Lieutenant Colonel Charles A. Lewis, KIA. Major Wayne Bolt, KIA. Major Henry M. Sirex, KIA. First Lieutenant F. Gatwood, KIA. The remains of BAT-21's crew have not been repatriated. In other words, they have never found them. But we will continue reading his name the first Saturday of every month. But that was the North Carolina tie to this airplane. Now, as you can see there, the light circle there, the lines there is the DMZ, Demilitarized Zone. And you can see where the arrow is, about where the bridge and so forth is, where that Colonel Hamilton was ejected. At the time of BAT-21's mission, American combat forces had been vastly reduced in South Vietnam under President Richard Nixon's Vietnamization policy. We were pulling out whole units. The North Vietnamese Army launched the Nguyen Way Offensive, or as we mentioned, the Easter Offensive, against the South Vietnamese and U.S. military on Friday, March 30th, 1972. Most of the Americans who were there at that time were in an advisor position. It was the largest attack of the war. It was time to take full advantage of the monsoon season, offering low clouds and poor visibility. When it rains there, it rains, and it's hard to see people on the ground from the airplanes because of the clouds and stuff. About 30,000 heavily equipped communist troops from the 304th, 308th Division, and 3 separate infantry regiments of the B-5 front across the DMZ into I Corps across the 5 northern provinces of South Vietnam, and they were stretched all the way across the DMZ, 30,000 of them plus. Due to the large-scale offense by the North Vietnamese in the South and BAT-21's forced parachuting into the area, the afternoon of April 2nd, 1972, began the largest and longest combat search and rescue operation of the war in Southeast Asia was about to begin. It would last a total of 17 days. 24 sorties would be flown, and 13 men would lose their life. It was all to save one man and the invaluable knowledge he had in his head. See, if we were the bloodthirsty killers and everything else that was made out to be by the press and so forth, it'd been a whole lot simpler to just drop the bomb on Colonel Hamilton to eliminate all this, the communists getting all this information from him. But no, He was an American soldier. He was on the ground, and they're going to do what they could to save the man. And a lot going on, and a lot of things were affected by his rescue, not just in where he was, but all around him. With only 9 months to go into his retirement, Hamilton was determined he was going to get out of this alive. He'd already figured out what he was going to do for his retirement. He was confident that his rescuers would soon be there to rescue him, because he knew that when a downed pilot, the search and rescue group were Johnny on the spot. What Hamilton did not know was that he had just landed midst of a 30,000 strong North Vietnamese offensive thrust. You know, if you land in the middle of 30,000 enemy guys, it's kind of hard to get to you. At a lower altitude, First Lieutenant Bill Janikowski and Captain Lyle Wilson in an O-2 Forward Air Controller, FAC, Forward Air Controller aircraft, saw BAT-21 explode. Now, that's the plane you see there. That was the kind of plane they were flying. You can see it doesn't have a whole lot of armament on it. But they were flying around as forward air controllers, and they saw the plane explode. When Hamilton's URC-64 rescue radio beeped, Janikowski responded and was surprised to learn that Hamilton was above him descending in his parachute. Janikowski followed Hamilton down. Hamilton was concealed by a low fog bank as he landed unseen by the NVA in a dry rice paddy. Okay, he's now on the ground. As Janikowski was watching Hamilton land, Janikowski's aircraft came under heavy anti-aircraft fire. He was astonished at the huge number of NVA troops, equipment, and heavy weapons in the area, because they were right there at the beginning of as a push. Hamilton found refuge in a group of bushes in the middle of a rice paddy. NVA troops were less than 1,000 meters from his location. Janikowski fixed Hamilton's location 1.2 miles north of the Camelot Bridge and just north of TL 88, a major east-west secondary road. That was one of the roads over there. Now, that bridge is going to actually be prominent in our next show. Our next show is going to be talking about the Camelot Bridge also. At the same time this was going on, that he was shot down, Captain John Ripley, advisor to the 3rd Vietnamese Marine Battalion, blew up the key highway QL1 bridge of the Quet Villa Viet River at Dong Ha, east of Hamilton's position. And you can see Ripley there, and I'm not going to go into a whole lot because that's our next show, but he was one of our soldiers for our next show. The NVA rerouted thousands of troops, dozens of tanks, and other equipment west along TL 88, immediately in front of Hamilton's position, to the Camelot River Bridge, 5 miles away. Now, the reason that Ripley blowing this bridge, there were 200 Soviet tanks on the road in front of this bridge. So they diverted a lot of those tanks and so forth to where Hamilton was. Kempton and Janikowski relayed Hamilton's coordinates to King 22, an HC-130 search and rescue aircraft operating just south of Quang Tri. Now, that is an HC-130. I'm going to try to give you all the airplanes and helicopters involved. It's a little hard to follow, but don't worry about it. We'll get you through to the end. Recovering Hamilton quickly was essential, as the odds of recovering downed airmen dropped below 20% if members were on the ground for 4 hours. So the idea was to get them in there and get them out as soon as possible. But their efforts would be severely hampered by the huge number of troops and large quantity of anti-aircraft fire in the area. Summit supported the NVA's efforts to capture and protect the Camelot Bridge near Hamilton's position. So a lot of things going on. The forward air control pilot's constant contact was reassuring and helpful in calling AH-1 Cobra. And you see the Cobra with his mouth open there, painting. An F-4 Phantom fighter bombers to lay down enough gunfire bombs and gravel anti-personnel mines. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about anti-personnel mines in a little bit, but it protects Hamilton, but it creates a real problem for him a little bit later. But it kept the enemy troops and villages away from his hideout. So they're calling in the Phantoms and the helicopters, all coming in to try to save Hamilton. While he was there, he saw the buildup. So Hamilton started to stay there with the information that he got from the forward air control pilots. And what he did was he coolly called in coordinates of the North Vietnamese around him and watched the ordnance explode. He called in the bombs and airplanes and so forth to bomb the enemy and just kind of sit there and watch it like he was watching a movie and didn't seem to get upset or whatever. And I think I'd have been upset because he was sitting there and that stuff was coming close to him. And they badly knew he was there because they saw him come out, the plane blow up, and all of a sudden these planes are coming in and bombing them. So, uh, but that's what he did because he thought it was just part of his job. Okay. Now, two Air Force search and rescue Douglas A-1 Skyraiders. Now we're going to see it. We're going to be talking a lot about Skyraiders tonight. So that's what they look like. It's a prop airplane. Don Morse and his wingman remained in Hamilton's vicinity. Okay, he was also there. The Skyraiders immediately scrambled to cover Hamilton's position. As soon as they knew he went down, they took off. When Morse first got the call, he thought because the aircraft had gone down in South Vietnam, the search and rescue, SAR, efforts could be accomplished fairly quickly. I mean, he's in South Vietnam. When he got over Hamilton's position, he was shocked at the amount of ground fire he received. It was more intense than anything he had seen in the war. Some pilots felt that the intensity of the aircraft fire was equal to that around going into Hanoi, which had to be a lot. Okay. Captain Morris called for emergency support, which picked up by UH-1 Slick Blue Ghost 39. Okay, near way. Piloted by First Lieutenant Byron Coulon. He had on board with him Captain Thomas White. White was the troop operations officer. So what Gulan, he dropped off White at Phu, which was right as an air base just outside of Hue, which it says there. White directed Coulon to proceed north and contacted Forward Air Control Janikowski, who was still there, for information on arrival. White also sent two Cobra gunships, Blue Ghost 28 and 24, and then added Blue Ghost 30, a second Huey. So with all the airplanes were flying around, he just sent 4 more helicopters. Okay. Lieutenant Coulon, Blue Ghost 39, proceeded across the river 50 feet above the ground towards Hamilton's position with the well-armed Blue Ghost 28 Cobra gunship following about 3,000 feet behind and 300 feet above. Blue Ghost 24 waited at the south side of the river for Blue Ghost 30 to catch up. As soon as Blue Ghost 39 and 28 crossed the river, Coulon and Rosenberry aircrafts were met by an immediate curtain of North Vietnamese fire from every direction with an intensity that defied belief. Rosenberry and his Cobra Blue Ghost 28 responded with rockets and 40-millimeter fire, and both helicopters were struck multiple times. There's the Cobra. Coulon flying Blue Ghost 39 tried to turn back south, but only managed to crash land its stricken aircraft about 4.2 miles east of Hamilton and 9/10 of a mile north of the river in an area full of NVA. When the helicopter crashed, Spec 5 Jose Astorga, the door gunner, was wounded, but he could still move around. And he tried to help the other crew members, but Pascal was pinned in the wreckage. Frank, who was seriously injured, urged Astorga to get out of the helicopter before it blew up and so forth. As you can see, down the helicopter. A few moments later, advancing North Vietnamese soldiers fired on the wreckage with automatic weapons, and the aircraft's fuel cells exploded with the remainder of the crew inside. Astorga was captured, but pilots First Lieutenant Byron Coulon and Warrant Officer John Frink, along with Spec 5 Ronald Pascal, were killed. And you can see their pictures with the NVA coming to get them. Okay. Rosenberry, flying Cobra Blue Ghost 28, called a mayday, but he was able to safely exit the area and land his severely damaged helicopter, and his helicopter was totaled. That's how bad it was shot up. Ken Gunner, Warrant Officer Charles Gorski, were picked up by HH-53C helicopter, which is Jolly Green Giant you see there, without incident. Rosenberry warned other aircraft against crossing the river. When Morris, and remember a while ago in his Skyraider, '07 learned that the quick snatch had failed, he and his wingmen, Skyraider '08, broke off, engaging North Vietnamese and returned to Da Nang. In other words, all the helicopters they were sent in were damaged or shot down, so they returned to Da Nang to refuel or whatever. Okay. Both Skyraiders were found to be so damaged when they got back to Da Nang, it would take several days to repair. Nail 59, a new version of the OV-10A Bronco aircraft, which you see there, equipped with the paved nail LORAN, which is a special radar piloted by Gary Furinchak, took over the forward air control duties. The search and rescue efforts were suspended for the night, and the U.S. and ARVN forces, that's the Army Republic of Vietnam, the South Vietnamese, remained unaware of the real strength of the NVA. We still hadn't had an idea there's 30,000 men out there. Advised by the forward air control to remain in place, Hamilton moved to a safer spot in the jungle and dug a hole to hide until morning. During the night, Nail 59 and King 27 and HC 130, commanded by Major Dennis Constant, stayed. So he has Skyraider, a helicopter, and a big plane all staying with him. They suddenly found themselves painted by radar and narrowly missed getting shot down themselves. So it wasn't, even though they were in the air flying around up high, it wasn't safe for them either. The Joint and Search Rescue Command was under the direction of the Director of Aerospace Rescue, Colonel Cecil Muirhead, who could restrict airspace activity for use of search and rescue vehicles or forces. He also, and that's a picture of a soldier hiding in the bushes. He also commanded all the dedicated assets needed to assist with the search and air rescue. Muirhead ordered a 24-hour forward air control coverage around Hamilton's position to watch over him and soften up the North Vietnamese position around him. In other words, there was 24 hours a day. There was one of those small planes flying around to make sure that Hamilton felt that knew that they were out there, and also to call in strikes and so forth around Hamilton. Here's where the problem came in. To protect the downed airmen and the search and rescue forces, Muirhead also established the 7th Air Force to establish a standard 17-mile no-fire zone around Hamilton. It prohibited friendly artillery, naval gunfire, or aircraft from engaging any target in the zone without approval. Now, we just mentioned a while ago Ripley having to blow up the bridge. Reason being was 30,000 men. There was 700 South Vietnam Marines there at Dong Ho trying to protect that bridge, and they could not get any support from airplanes or artillery because all of it was shut off so it wouldn't hurt Hamilton. That's part of the story that we don't know how many people were killed because of this situation, but that was all out to protect Hamilton. 3 North Vietnamese divisions were attacking, and the 3rd ARVN could not reply for several hours with artillery or requested tactical air strikes in the area. Okay. On April 3rd, air search and rescue forces attempted a first light rescue, which can achieve surprise with minimum force. In other words, as soon as the sun come up, they were going to be there. A search and rescue crew took off from Thailand. It consists of 2 HH-53 rescue helicopters, the Jolly Green Giants, the top pictures there, and 2 A-1 Skyraiders, the left picture, and then 2 more Skyraiders joined them later on the scene. So we have 4 Skyraiders and 2 helicopters there now, plus the forward air control that are watching them. So let's see, 2, 4, 5 airplanes that we know of and 2 helicopters trying to get in there. How they kept from running into each other is still beyond me. The air was covered in solid overcast, preventing visual control of airstrikes by the on-scene OV-10A back nail 25, Captain Rocky Smith and Captain Rich Atkinson, coordinated the work of several F-4s. Okay, we add that to the mix. 2 Phantoms were coming in with all the other airplanes. And they were dropping the CBU-42 anti-personnel bombs. As you can see down in the picture there in the right-hand corner, it's a bomb, and inside that bomb is a bunch of bombs about the size of a softball. What happens, that thing opens before it hits the ground, and all those different softball-sized bombs come out all around, and so it really covers the ground, and if you step on them, they go up and blow you up. When Nail 25 ran low on fuel, it was replaced by OV-10 Nail 38, flown by Captain William J. Henderson. His call sign was Nail 38 Alpha. And with him in the plane was First Lieutenant Mark Clark, Nail 38 Bravo. Now, if you saw the movie, now you get introduced to Clark, who was Danny Glover's part in the movie. In the movie, Clark was flying an airplane by himself. I tried to find a picture of Mark Clark, but unfortunately, Mark Clark's father was a big-time general in World War II career and involved in Vietnam. And every time I tried to look up Clark, I always got the general. So I couldn't get Clark's picture there to bring to you. The NVA had a listening post in the area and were listening to the American radio traffic. They were familiar with American search and rescue tactics, and on the second day, they began to use the down flyer as bait. You know, we used to watch Cowboys and the Indians were always doing that too. The Vietnamese must have learned that from the Indians. They positioned a number of anti-aircraft and surface-to-air missiles in the area near Hamilton. One pilot reported that SAM calls were causing them to fly lower and into small arms threat. In other words, to get away from the SAMs, what they were doing was they were flying lower, but when they were flying lower, they were running across the anti-aircraft guns. Ground fire was accurate and well-disciplined. The NVA were very definitely monitoring and jamming American communications. As you can see there, an aircraft gun down the lower right-hand picture there. Okay. Henderson obtained Loran, and I'm going to tell you what this tells you what it was, the radar thing, a system of long-distance navigation in which position is determined from the intervals between signal pulses received from widely spaced radio transmitters. I like the word just Loran, but I do because that gets confusing. But anyway, they got it fixed on Hamilton's position. Coast Guard Lieutenant Commander J. Crow was piloting Jolly Green 65. The helicopter broke through the clouds and rapidly dropped in the area where Hamilton was hidden. They were going to drop down and get him real quick. The aircraft was immediately hit by a wall of NVA gunfire. Their rounds tore through the aircraft, destroying the instrument panel. And the picture there is a Jolly Green, and you can see the instrument panel, not shot up yet. Okay. Crow struggled to get the aircraft out of the fire zone, and with his instrument shot up, he had to rely on visual clues to fly his aircraft. He nursed the helicopter south and was able to get to Phu Bai Airfield, okay, which is right outside the way we already talked about. Now, Jolly Green 66, flown by Colonel Bill Harris, followed Crow to Hamilton's location and found 10 North Vietnamese tanks in a withering onslaught of ground fire. He fought the controls to bring his rescue helicopter within 100 yards of Hamilton. His gunners firing their 3 6-barrel miniguns engaged the North Vietnamese. Harris, though, was forced to get his badly damaged aircraft to gain altitude and limp off to safety. So we lost some more aircraft. Forward air controller Nail 38, piloted by Henderson, was forced to fly in and out of cloud cover as perilously low altitudes, was hit by North Vietnamese fire and shot down. Henderson landed on the north side of the Song Mae Yang River, about 1,600 feet from Hamilton. He hid in a bamboo patch until local villagers came looking for him. They cut it down, and he was taken north and became a POW. Clark parachuted to the ground safely on the south side of the river and was able to elude capture. Now, that agreed with the movie. Just didn't bother to tell you that Henderson was also involved, okay? After locking in on Hamilton's location, the Air Force bombarded the area around him for the next 3 days. I can't imagine hiding in a hole someplace and having them drop bombs all around you for 3 days. On April 4th, a flight from 10 Douglas A-1 Skyraiders, half the total available in all of South Vietnam, So all of South Vietnam, there were 20 Skyraiders, and they sent 10 in. And they were going in to pave the way for a search and rescue team. And they were badly shot up. 8 of the 10 aircraft was damaged too severely. The damage significantly affected the availability of Skyraiders for future use. In other words, almost half the South Vietnamese Skyraiders were shot up this day. Okay. At dusk, Major Jimmy D. Kempton, flying a FD Phantom, you can see the Phantom there, and a wingman entered from the coast under a descending 500-foot ceiling, and that means the clouds were coming down, and dropped a BLU-52 search and rescue ordnance. As you can see in the picture there, how it opens up and all those softball-sized things come out. On all 4 sides of Hamilton's location, the last search and rescue ordnance of April 4th. And it says there the submunitions of the CBU-52 is a softball size that holds 220 of them, and they use it against personnel or light-skinned vehicles. And that I'm not certain what a light-skinned vehicle would be other than my shirt, because they were pretty light-skinned, but a Jeep or a truck or whatever. Yeah. Yeah. So they were there. On April 5th, bad weather, because it was right at the edge of the monsoons, prevented any search and rescue activity. On April 6th, a third attempt was made to pick up Hamilton, and now First Lieutenant Mark Clark. Now we got 2 men on the ground we got to save. 4 Douglas A-1 Skyraiders. So we must got some of the other 10. Sandy's 1, 2, 5, and 6 prepared the areas around the survivors with extensive bombing and strafing. They were assisted by 2 HHC-53 helicopters, which were the Jolly Green Giants, 67 and 60. During the day, American fighters flew 52 sorties and 4 B-52 bombers, bombed all around Cam Lo and the bridge where he was at. You would have thought that would really have done the North Vietnamese military in, but obviously it didn't. During April 6th, in the area around Hamilton, the NVA launched 80 SAM missiles. It was estimated that Hamilton and Clark were in the midst of 5 or 6 North Vietnamese battalions. That's a lot of communists. Their air defense seriously challenged American air superiority and blunted the success of close air support in the area. As you can see there, the anti-aircraft guns, the tank, the people. It wasn't that they weren't fighting the Viet Cong there. They were fighting soldiers with the same training, basically, and some of these guys have been fighting longer than Americans. They were well-trained and well-disciplined. They didn't break and run. Captain Peter Chapman volunteered to pilot Jolly Green 67, the fact that he was short. Short means that he was probably getting ready to come home within 30 days or so. That's what we call short. Or I felt I was short at 60 days. Captain Bowley in Sandy 1 decided they would pick up BAT-21, which was Hamilton, first, and then nail 38, which was Clark, immediately afterwards. Sandy 3 joined the group with a full load of white phosphorus that could be used to lay down a smoke screen. You can see the picture there, white phosphorus, or we call it Willie Pete, was dropped down so they could get in. Skyraider Captain Bowley in Sandy 01 called in additional strikes on targets around Hamilton position and rechecked the area. North Vietnamese response was limited. Aware that this could be a trap, they nonetheless gave the go-ahead. In other words, they didn't shoot back. They just kind of laid low there. As Jolly Green 67 across the river with Jolly Green 60 high and above guarding their approach, Jolly Green 67 began taking fire from all sides. As they approached Hamilton's position, they called for Hamilton to pop smoke. In other words, they carried smoke grenades, and you would throw out, it was different colors, blue, pink there, or red, and you would notify it. Now, that puts the idea that the helicopters are coming in to save Hamilton, so he's supposed to pop smoke so they know where he's at. The only problem is now the bad guys also know where he's at. The aircraft was pummeled with automatic weapons and anti-aircraft fire from all quarters. Hamilton hesitated, and the Jolly Green Giant tried to pull away. Despite the best efforts of the remaining aircraft, Jolly Green Giant was critically damaged. Johnny Green 67 flew east at first, further into territory held by the North Vietnamese. In other words, he was going the wrong way. Before it turned southeast for a few kilometers, when a fire broke out in the left engine, pieces of the tail rotor struck the main rotor, and the aircraft rolled and crashed on its left side, burning ferociously. There were no rescue beepers heard. When the plane goes down or helicopter goes down, it has a beeper so they can follow on the radio, but there was none heard at all. Okay. The entire crew was listed as MIA and presumed killed. Captain Peter Hayden Chapman, the second, was the pilot. Captain John Henry Call, the third co-pilot. Technical Sergeant William Roy Pearson, Technical Sergeant. Alan J. Every, pararescue. You can see him there with his pararescue outfit. And Sergeant James Harold Alley was the combat photographer. He probably hated he was there. And Roy Prater was the crew chief. The fire consumed the helicopter was so hot it melted parts of the aircraft and continued to burn for 3 more days. But that's 6 more that it cost getting Hamilton out. Hamilton and Clark's Spirit sank after realizing that 6 men died while attempting to rescue them. After a stern sermon from the on-scene commander, Nail 32, Captain John Van Etten, Hamilton decided, yes, somehow was still going to make it. In other words, he was ready to give up and turn himself over to the communists. But then after he got read the riot act to him by Captain Etten, he decided to hang out. And he camouflaged his hole and hiding there for 7 days. It was 7 nights and 6 days. Now, during that period of time, he didn't have food, didn't have water. He left the hole twice to scavenge for food and was almost caught the second time when he was spotted by a boy and his dog. NVA soldiers searching for him passed within 20 feet of his hole twice. Now, I have a picture there of a young Vietnamese boy, and I always used to, whenever I showed a picture like that, people say, well, he's smoking. Folks, you have to realize something. He ain't worried about lung cancer. He's worried about living another day himself because he's in a war zone. Anyway, that was what young Vietnamese boy. The Search and Air Rescue Task Force mission leader, Captain Fred Bowley in Sandy 1, called the rescue off for this time being because it was too dangerous. The remaining aircraft exited the area. It was just too hot. Hamilton and Clark would have to spend another night behind the front lines, which was everywhere. The North Vietnamese, alerted by the intense efforts to find Hamilton, increased their efforts to find him. So when all these people coming in and trying to get one man like that, the North Vietnamese, who were not totally stupid, going, this guy must be important. So they just kind of intensified their look around him. Helicopter Squadron Commander Lieutenant Colonel Bill Harris concluded that the air rescue could not be attempted at that time due to the heavy concentration of North Vietnamese forces in the immediate area around Clark and Hamilton. You got to remember that 30,000 communists were trying to come across the border, and the rescue of Hamilton was getting in their way. Harris called Colonel Muirhead and told him that they had to find another way. Hamilton was told to sit tight while they worked up an alternative plan. Hamilton had 2 survival radios, a first aid kit, 2 kinds of flares, a knife, a .38 caliber revolver, a compass, a map, an empty water bottle, and no food, which would be important later. On the morning of April 7th, First Lieutenant Bruce C. Walker, accompanied by Naval Artillery Spotter Marine Lieutenant Harry F. Potts, were flying a U.S. Air Force OV-10A Covey, which you see there. Potts was directing naval gunfire from the destroyer U.S. Buchanan against Soviet-supplied North Vietnamese tanks to protect Hamilton. In other words, some of those 200 tanks that were at the other bridge were coming over there. At 11:05, the O-1 Bird Dog pilot observed a SAM launch, and in Covey 282 was shot down. Radio contact was established with both Potts and Walker, and both reported they were uninjured, but each man was too close to the North Vietnamese forces to attempt a rescue. In other words, they were down and they won't hurt, but you couldn't get in to get them. So now we got 4 men on the ground. Okay. Lieutenant Mark Clark, who was shot down earlier, hid on the south side of the river, while Walker was about 3.7 miles north of Hamilton, who was on the north side of the river, 1.2 miles from the town of Kamloops. Clark continued to evade capture, was in contact with search and rescue personnel, and warned them away due to the proximity of the NVA forces. In other words, he wanted to be rescued, but he knew they couldn't get in because of the forces and so forth. So he just kept hiding. In January 1992, members of the Joint Task Force for Full Accounting examined war artifacts at Hanoi Military Museum and found Bruce Walker's ID card. Remember, we just talked about Walker and Potts being shot down. Walker's backseat spotter are this disposition and location of Potts Walker's backseat spotter are still unknown. It was Potts' 25th birthday, as you can see there from his uniform. He was a Marine. He was wounded and captured alive, but later died in Quang Binh prison. Neither of the remains have ever been recovered. So there's two more we lost saving Hamilton. After 5 days and numerous attempts to rescue Hamilton, 5 aircraft had been shot down, another 16 seriously damaged, 10 service members had been killed or were missing in action, 2 were POWs, and 2 were somewhere behind enemy lines also waiting to be rescued. At this time, the supreme commander there was Creighton Abrams. Westmoreland had left. On April 8th, General Creighton Abrams was briefed on the high losses and several failed attempts to rescue Hamilton and Clark. He ordered that no further search and air rescue would be attempted, but that given Hamilton's top secret clearance and knowledge of missiles and countermeasure technology, that every effort should be made to bring him out. In other words, don't lose any more aircraft, but simply can't get him out. United States Marine Corps Colonel Al Gray suggested a covert land-based rescue operation. Lieutenant Colonel Anderson, commander of the Joint Personnel Recovery Center, ordered ground rescue. I have met Al Gray. He is an awesome gentleman. He was actually later the commander of the Marine Corps altogether, and I can tell you what, that man is dynamic. He could read the telephone book to you. You probably join the Marines. In Saigon, there was a Navy SEAL Lieutenant Thomas R. Norris, and that's his picture, one of just 3 SEAL officers and 9 enlisted men remaining in Vietnam. There never was a great deal of SEALs in there, but he is one of 3 that's still there. And he had just completed an assignment in the Mekong Delta. He was waiting for orders when they came in for a commando operation to get Hamilton out. Norris was immediately dispatched to lead an operation to rescue Hamilton. He recruited 5 Sea Commandos from the Naval Advisory Attachment in Da Nang, which was basically Vietnamese Seabees. Excuse me, not Seabees, but SEALs. Okay. Arvin, that was South Vietnamese Army. Brigadier General Vu Van Ga gave Lieutenant Colonel Anderson a Ranger platoon of about 20 men and 3 M48 tanks. You can see there, Rangers. And with observation range of the strategic Kamloops Bridge. In other words, they set up where they could see the bridge. General Jia thought the mission was insane and refused to take responsibility for a mission once they crossed the river. And Lieutenant Colonel Anderson, who spoke Vietnamese, was able to obtain additional intelligence from the headquarters of the 1st Armored Brigade at Dong Ha. Okay, and U.S. rescuers knew that North Vietnamese were monitoring the radio communications and understood English. In other words, every time they were on the radio talking, the communists were listening to them and knew what they were saying. Clark and Hamilton were several miles apart. A forward air controller told Clark, who was from Idaho, to get to the Snake and make like Esther Williams and float to Boston. In other words, get to the river and swim east. For the young folks out there, there was a movie star by the name of Esther Williams, a beautiful lady, and I don't think I remember any movie she ever made that she was not in a pool swimming. That's what she was all about. And the Snake was the river. So they told Clark, who was shot down later after Hamilton, to go to the river, jump in and swim east. In other words, float to Boston. Okay, that's what he was told to do. Now, Hamilton was a little more difficult task. In order for him to get around the North Vietnamese occupied village and gun emplacements, his rescuers learned that one of the best golfers in the Air Force, and that he retained a detailed memory of the golf course he had played. By improvising a code using a series of specific golf course holes to guide him through the minefields, remember those bombs we were talking about a while ago, all those softball bombs? Well, now he's got to get around them so he didn't get blown up by his own rescue bombs. So he has to get around them and so forth. So they're ready to send him a radio call. Now, I know this really confused the communists sitting out there. You're going to play 18 holes. This is what they're telling Hamilton. You're going to get into Swanee and make like Esther Williams and Charlie Tuna. Now, for those of you who also don't know, there was a big advertisement, and it was Charlie the Tuner for Sunkissed Tuner, I believe it was. The round starts on number 1 at Tucson National. That this is the new Tucson National Golf Course, but I don't know whether that's hole number 1. It's irrelevant at the moment. Now, they just gave him these coordinates and so forth. Didn't tell him why. Hamilton initially replied, "What have you been smoking?" But he finally figured out the code. It took me half an hour to figure out they were giving me direct distance and directions. Hamilton explained, the number 1 at Tucson National is 408 yards running southeast. They wanted me to move southeast 400 yards. The course would lead me to water. The man had spent too much time on the golf course. Using the golf course code, he was directed towards the river. To save time, Hamilton passed through the abandoned village that had concealed the guns that were shot down his would-be rescuers. Although the village had been bombed, he was confronted by a North Vietnamese soldier. Hamilton killed him using a knife in hand-to-hand combat. So his search and invasion training had come in good. At one point, he was given directions to a refresher stand where he would have to tap his own keg. That's what they told him. Go to a refresher stand and tap your own keg, which I'm certain the communists had no idea what he was talking about. Physically exhausted, hungry, and dehydrated, Hamilton found a banana plantation where he could tap the tree for drinking water. He got lost briefly and then fell off a cliff, breaking his arm. Guy couldn't have any luck except for bad luck for nothing, could he? Okay. Lieutenant Colonel Anderson now planned to rescue Hamilton and Clark together. Norris and Anderson called in airstrikes in an attempt to weaken the NVA's resistance, but the NVA answered with mortar rounds and a B-40 rocket that struck the team's position. Now that is a B-40 rocket. We basically call that today an RPG. Anderson, the senior American commander, and the senior Vietnamese commanders were all hurt, so they were kind of laid up. The wounded Vietnamese troops had to be evacuated. One commando was killed. Remember Lieutenant Norris, the Navy SEAL, was left with 5 Vietnamese commandos who spoke little English. Okay. The OV-10 pilots, Lieutenant Mark Clark, remember, we got him on the ground, and went to the Swanee, Nell 38 Bravo, was seriously weakened by 5 days hiding from NVA forces with little to eat. Since he was closest to the team's position, Lieutenant Norris, decided to rescue him first. The rescuer's initial plan was to swim upriver and meet Clark, but Norris tested the current and decided it was too strong. In other words, the current was bringing Clark down, and he would have to fight the current to go up. Clark was relayed instructions by the forward air controller overhead to get into water after dark and float downstream where Norris and his team would intercept him. The rescue team would have to take a much more hazardous route by inserting along the riverbank. Anderson, Norris, and 5 Vietnamese commandos set a position near the river, which ran near the positions of both downed airmen. Colonel Anderson ordered Lieutenant Norris to take his team no more than 1 kilometer forward and wait for the survivors to come to them. In other words, don't go get them, let them come to you. But after departing, Norris ignored the order and turned off his radio. Traveling twice the distance upriver, he passed through frequent North Vietnamese patrols, trucks, and columns of tanks. In other words, they were pouring across the line coming down. Clark floated down the river, which was chilly from being that far north, even though it was in South Vietnam. About 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, Norris could hear his heavy breathing on the river. Norris was about to leave his cover to pull Clark ashore when a 6-man North Vietnamese Army patrol walked between them. Norris remained hidden, hoping they wouldn't notice his Clark's breathing, and knowing that using their weapons would expose their team position to hundreds of enemy troops around them. By the time the patrol passed by, Clark had floated on downstream. Norris radioed Clark and instructed him to get out of the river on the south bank. In other words, they had to go back now to find him. On his own, Norris left his team and swam downstream for several hours, looking for Clark. Near dawn, he saw some motion and found Clark hiding behind a sandpan on the riverbank. Now, sandpans are a lot. You can see one there with a cover on it. It could be one without a cover. It could be a bigger one, but sandpans cover a lot of different sizes and so forth. Norris had persuaded Clark to follow him, was finally able to relink up with the rest of his team. Norris delivered Clark to Henderson. Clark was transported to an outpost on the Kuvat River at Dong Ha by Armored Personnel Carrier, Army Republic of Vietnam, and then flown to Da Nang. So now we got Clark. On April 9th, Hamilton's 8th day of evading NVA forces all around him, forward air controller Harold Ike, I'm going to call it Ike, kept in constant contact with Hamilton. Ike and the pilots of 281 Skyraiders, here they are back again, were shocked to see Hamilton come out of his hiding place and stand out in the open on a sandbar in the river, waving a white flag at them. Hamilton's mental and physical health were precarious. He was very weakened, having lost 40 pounds in the 10 days since his jet had been shot down. So he's standing out there in the open and waving a white rag and where everybody could see him. And on April 11th, Hamilton was too weak to move any further. Norris was well aware of the overwhelming North Vietnamese presence, but decided to proceed upriver again. Hamilton wasn't transmitting on schedule, and his occasional radio calls were difficult to understand. Norris could only follow parts of Hamilton's weak transmissions, and Norris knew he would have to go get him. NVA, North Vietnamese Army, fixed the location of Lieutenant Colonel Anderson's outpost and poured mortar and artillery fire on the forward ARVN outpost, killing 2 of the 5 remaining ARVN SEALs. Norris was left only 3 Vietnamese commandos. During the search for Hamilton, and on the night of April 12th, they headed upriver more than 2.5 miles, slipping through massive NVA force. It wasn't just, let's go up the river. That 30,000 was still coming. During the night, upon seeing the extreme large number of North Vietnamese forces, 2 of the commandos declined to advance further, saying they refused to follow America just to rescue another American. As you can see them there, they were kind of going, let's go someplace else. Norris convinced the Vietnamese SEALs to stay by persuading them that the only way they could get back to safety was stay with the team. After cautiously searching river ashore for 2 more hours without success, they returned to the forward operating base to rest and hope they would be more successful the next night. Forward air controller Ike fixed Hamilton's position during the day so Norris could find him that night. Okay. On the night of April 13th, Norris didn't dare take the 2 Navy SEALs or ARVN soldiers who had faltered the night before. He was prepared to go all by himself, but Petty Officer 3rd Class Nguyen Van Kiet volunteered to go with him. Norris bluntly told Nguyen that he wasn't sure either one of them would return. In other words, he wanted to make sure that Kiet knew that what they were going for, they may not come back. They worked their way slowly upriver until they came upon an empty, destroyed village. They found clothing in an abandoned sandpan. Nguyen and Norris, who was slightly built, donned Vietnamese clothing and disguised themselves as fishermen. They rowed quietly up the river, but even in the pitch dark and dense fog, they could see a large number of North Vietnamese soldiers and tanks on the shoreline. Traveling upriver in the Sandpan, they came out on the heavy fog and found themselves about 2.5 miles from their starting point and under the Camlo Bridge. They had passed Hamilton's position more than 30 minutes earlier. Turning around, they worked their way south before putting ashore and began to search for Hamilton. They found him sitting in a clump of bushes, alive, but delirious and extremely weakened, having eaten only 4 small ears of corn in 12 days, and having lost 45 pounds since his plane was shot down. How would you like to go almost 2 weeks on those 4 ears of corn? He weighed only 128 pounds. Sunrise was coming, and although Norris thought it was best to wait until dark to return downriver, Hamilton needed to be evacuated immediately. Despite the risk, Norris and Wynn hid Hamilton in the bottom of the Sandpan, covered him with bamboo, and started out down the river. Their Sandpan was soon spotted by North Vietnamese troops. Some of them fired at them, but Norris and Wynn could not afford to return fire because they had to keep paddling, and they paddled fiercely, using the current and the dense foliage along the far side of the river to their advantage and trying to outdistance the soldiers. However, when they found a bend in the river, the NVA fired on them with a heavy caliber machine gun. They pulled a Sandpan to the bank and turned it over to provide some cover. And then the forward air control, IC, overhead called in air support, and 5 U.S. Navy Skyhawks, as you see there, killed a number of North Vietnamese troops and provided cover for the final escape. 2 Skyraiders also, they keep coming in. 2 Skyraiders also insisted dropping both explosive and MK-47 smoke bombs, providing a smoke screen. Returning to the river, the 3 men were soon able to receive support from the South Vietnamese forces. Landing on the riverbank, they were met by armed soldiers. Hamilton was not able to walk, so they carried him back to the bunker. There, an armored personnel carrier, and you can see him there. That is actually a picture of Hamilton and Norris, standing up. The blonde-headed guy is Norris, and they carried him back to the bridge and headquarters at Dong Ha. From Dong Ha, Hamilton was transported by U.S. Army dust-off helicopter. Lieutenant Ken Warner, aircraft commander, to the 95th Evacuation Hospital in Da Nang. He was shortly afterwards evacuated to the hospital at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, where he recuperated for a month. I can't imagine he only was there a month in the hospital. He had to be quite a man. Okay. Okay, next. Oh, you need to go forward again. You went the wrong way. Then go one down again. All right. Well, I see what I got now. I confused myself. I've had so many different airplanes flying around, I confused myself. To protect the downed airmen and search and rescue forces, Colonel Cecil Muirhead established a standard 17-mile no-fire zone around Hamilton shortly after he went down. It remained in effect until 10 p.m. and prohibited friendly artillery, naval fire, or aircraft from engaging any target without approval. No, this is different. Okay. The no-fire zone encompassed nearly the entire combat zone of the Arvin 3rd Division, including the crucial Cam Lo Bridge, which we talked about a while ago, with the 700 Marines were there, Vietnamese Marines, and Captain Ripley. As a result, the South Vietnamese Army and Marines in the area were severely hampered in the efforts to stem the NVA offensive against Dong Ha and Quang Tri City. You wonder how the war would have come out at the end had they been able to get the artillery and the planes and so forth. During the 6-hour period, thousands of NVA troops pushed into the region designated I Corps. When it was seen that the NVA forces were pouring through the gap unimpeded, the no-fire zone was reduced at 10 p.m. that night, but not before the action generated considerable debate. One ranking advisor commented, "When viewed in relation to all the events of the day, a worse decision could not have been made. The 3rd Arvin had lost most of its artillery in the first 2 days of the offensive. Of the 700 the Marines, there was only like 30 or some left, and in fact had surrendered 2 of the batteries intact to the NVA. Hamilton commented after the war, if the taxpayers and my neighbors knew what it cost to pull me out of there, they'd probably shot me." And there's a picture of Ripley again at the bridge. Okay. That is the story tonight of BAT-21. Next week, our next show will be about 2 gentlemen, both of them heroes. It will be Ripley and Riscola, both men of courage, and that will be 25th of July. And if you like to have you to come back and see that show, You can go back online and go to On Demand and see this show over again. These two men that we're going to be talking about next time are phenomenal. One of them was a hero. Both of them were heroes in Vietnam. One of them was a hero in Vietnam and also very much a hero in 9/11. And the things he did in Vietnam and the things he did with 9/11 definitely make him a hero. But thank you for tuning in for the show. Again, love to have you call in. If you'd like to be a guest, reach out. We're always looking for guests. I need some Marines. They're always too reluctant to talk. And I don't necessarily want always combat soldiers. There was one combat soldier for two of us who were REMF, rear echelon, and we'll stop there. But we all had our stories and times and so forth. So again, if you're out there, I would love to have your story, no matter what it was, even if you're a war protester or whatever. Your story needs to be told. So again, we'll look forward to seeing you July 25th, and have a good day, good evening, and good couple of weeks till we see you then. Thank you very much. And thank you.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.